Alright, welcome back to Adobe Photoshop CC, and this is a continuation of the combo project, and this is part 7. And we have the type set up in last tutorial. So the next step is to actually create style effects for both the type here, and I'm going to go over that just briefly here in this short tutorial. And then the next tutorial we'll get into the shadows on how to match the animal here. So what I'm going to start with actually is the bottom part here. I feel like the name works pretty well, the title here by James Kleckner, but I want to add a drop shadow to that. So I'm going to double click on the layer here to bring up the styles menu, and what I'm going to choose is simply drop shadow and click on that. Now currently I may have all kinds of other settings in here. What I want to do here is just reduce the distance here quite a bit. In fact, let me cancel out here. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit, make it easier to see here. Sometimes I do this with style effects. I'll zoom in on the type and then double click on the style effects to kind of see it a little bit closer in action here. And what I want to do is reduce the distance. I want a little bit of distance, but not quite so much. The spread, can basically come out a little bit. And then the size, I don't want it to be soft like that. I kind of want it to be crisp shadows. I kind of want to feel like it's popping off the edge there. And what I can then do is click in here and move a little bit if I want to angle the shadow a little bit. And I kind of want it to come down, kind of like light coming from the top left there. I kind of like that effect there. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, one other thing I could do is I could click in the shadow and actually pick a color in here. And sometimes that'll work. But I think, like the color here, I think works pretty well. And then just click OK. And then the opacity here is set to 50%. So if I need to make it a little bit darker, I can. I can go all the way up to 100%, but I don't really want it to be quite that strong. Maybe around 60% will probably be good. And then click OK. Let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit and see how that looks. That reads pretty well. Now, the type up here, evolutionary happenstance, I'm going to double click on it again. You always want to double click in the gray part. Notice what happened when I double click on the T, it activates the actual type here. So I double click in the gray, and what I want to add is a bevel emboss. And I don't want the outer bevel, I want a inner bevel here. And I want it to be very subtle. So I'm going to reduce the depth a little bit and the size. So what I'm looking for more is kind of like this, where it's like a little highlight around the tips, the edges here. And chisel hard, I think, will be good for the type. And then down here, linear dodge add, I have it set to 100%. Let's click in here and see. If we do choose one that's not so bright, probably pure white is probably fine. Click OK. And then for the shadow part, let's click in here and choose something maybe a little bit cooler. I'm thinking like this blue here, but maybe a little bit darker would be kind of good. And then click OK. And then one other thing I want to apply to this type here is an actual drop shadow. But I want this drop shadow to actually be a lot softer, a lot lighter. So the opacity of this one is going to really reduce quite a bit. And I want to pull it out just a little bit more, so maybe about 25% there. And I want the distance to come out maybe a little bit more. Let's see. And maybe not. I think I will leave it around 10% or so. Maybe I just need to click in here and see. Sometimes I like to do is just kind of play around with it and see how it looks. Now, as you notice, I'm clicking here. I'm actually messing with the style effects of this one too. So let me cancel out here for a second and then double click on it again. And I like the bevel emboss options I had there. So I'm going to switch back to inner bevel, have the depth be real shallow, and the size something like that. Looks good. Again, 100% for the opacity. Click in here and choose that dark blue. Click OK. Now, if I want to choose a drop shadow, maybe I want the shadow to be a little bit different than the shadow down here. You can uncheck this global light. That way I won't affect the shadow. I can adjust this shadow however I want. So if I want it to come over a little bit to the side here, straight across, I can do that. And then what I want to do also is reduce or increase the size, but reduce the spread a little bit, so it's real soft. I kind of want this a nice effect here. I think works pretty well. Maybe reduce the distance a little bit. No, I like the distance a little bit. Um, just a little bit of finessing here because I want it just to pop off a little bit more. I think that reads pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to apply. Let's have a look. The text, from up close looks pretty good, but from a distance I am noticing that the softness of that drop shadow does seem a little bit blurry. It tends to feel like the text is blurred. So what I want to do is actually reduce that a little bit, make it a little bit sharper, which means a way to get around this is to drop the opacity, which is what I had initially thought of doing. So I think doing that will work out better. Let's see how that looks. It still has a little bit of double vision there. So this is one of those things that you can kind of play around with and just see, does this work for me? Does it not? And ultimately, I may end up just losing the drop shadow altogether. But I think if I finesse it a little bit, something like that maybe, drop the opacity a little bit. Or let's try clicking in here and choosing some sort of color from the sky as the drop shadow. Like that color there looks pretty good. Actually, I think that looks pretty well. I'm going to go and click OK. I like that. Evolutionary Happenstance by James Kleckner. So there we are. We got the book done, the title part so far. In the next tutorial, we're going to explore how to create our shadows and cast shadow for the animal combo. Until then, see you soon.